All right, perfect. Well, welcome everyone to the People's Strategy Forum podcast. We're a show that guides leaders on how to elevate the workforce overall. And so we believe that people are at the heart of successful organizations and that team members' well-being, reward, career development, they're all essential. Hey, do we have Sumit? Sumit, hey, Sumit.
Yay!
We're just kicking things off. So anyway, this show discusses the practical and effective leadership strategies for our top executives and senior professionals and talent managers overall. And so I wanted to introduce you to some of our hosts today. We were just saying that Sumit just joined. Sumit is from India, and he has a lot of global talent expert. He's a people strategist that can, and he harnesses over 30 years of experience in multiple different locations and industries and so forth. So Sumit is just power packed with good information. And we also have Shar Miller. Shar is what I call our serial entrepreneur. In addition to being a senior HR professional, she's a people strategist that is known for HR with a heart. So thank you, Shar, for joining us here. And then, of course, we have Howard Nisewitz. So Howard Nisewitz has over 30 years of experience and a lot with larger organizations, and he has a passion for technology, making sure that companies are converting over to those important systems, and so that they can elevate their game, always trying to influence people to get off of spreadsheets and so forth. But now I want to introduce you to our speaker today. So this is really important because I know a lot of our listeners out there are leading change in the world of business. And we have a remarkable guest today that with a deep level of expertise and is a true beacon on navigating the challenging waters of professional life. And so we're going to talk about a lot of these things today. And so one thing that is critically important is that we're going to talk about resilience and staying, and fighting burnout. And so she is the host of Fried, the Burnout podcast, and also the author of Bouncebackability Factor. So Caitlin's insights have touched the lives and resonated across platforms of such as like Forbes and NPR and the New York Post. I mean, it's such a pleasure to have you on. I'm so excited to get into this conversation. So can you tell us a little bit about how resentment is your let's dive into your background first. I promised I'm gonna learn a little bit more about you and how we got here and how the people that you help.
What is it about my background that I can share with you? What are you thinking about? What are you wondering about?
What I'm wondering is I feel like there must be a story behind the burnout issue, and that made you or drove you to help all the people on this topic specifically. And
that's a really good guess. That's a good guess. There's definitely a story here. I was really lucky to be one of those people that followed my heart.
Mm-hmm.
I left high school, got a full scholarship to Boston University as a pre-med student, was very excited about becoming a doctor, not only because I thought I could use some level of intelligence that I had proven over the years, but also because I liked the idea of having a title that was that high. This was, I grew up in a sort of destitute city in Massachusetts that didn't offer a lot of opportunity for growth or change. And so for me, becoming a doctor was almost like proving that I could get out of it. And I was 2 years in when I realized it was not the right path for me. This was my first decision to avoid burnout, was thinking, I don't want to be over 30, just finishing school and have $250,000 in debt and be so tired that I can't even take care of the people that are coming to me because of how grueling the education is and the internships are. I went to one of my teachers at the time. I was doing a graduate level course. I don't know why they let me, but they did, in meditation with Livia Cohn, who is the world's foremost scholar of Taoism. I said, Livia, What am I going to do? She said, well, just do Chinese medicine instead. I said, what the heck is that? That started a love affair with Chinese medicine. I moved out to California, did a master's degree. I ended up meeting my husband, who's Polish, on a trip to Argentina before I finished my degree. That led to me moving to Poland and starting my first acupuncture practice after finishing school in Warsaw. It was incredibly successful and not great at the same time. I had that moment of my life where I was checking off all the boxes. I was 28. I was paying off American student loans from Poland, which is incredibly difficult because the money just doesn't add up the same way, right? I was charging, I think, around the equivalent of around $25 for an acupuncture treatment. And I had to send $1,000 a month back to the States to pay my bill. So just do the math really quick, just it doesn't add up fast enough. So I was able to do it. I was fairly well known in Poland because of it. I was an American acupuncturist working in Poland doing fertility. It was a very strange combination of things. So I was on TV and I was in magazines and I was miserable and my health was falling apart and I didn't know what to do. And I felt really distraught because I'm a healthcare practitioner. I shouldn't know how to deal with this, and I didn't. I told my husband it was Poland's fault, the country. I blamed a country because that's reasonable. It's like, spoiler alert, it wasn't Poland's fault. We moved to Prague. My husband got a job offer, so we moved to Prague. Prague was a much easier life, but I didn't really understand that it was burnout that was happening to me until a couple of years later. Burnout wasn't really talked about. This was 2016. There was an article in Harvard Business Review that I read, and I was like, and then started the recovery process that led to everything that I'm doing today.
Well, tell us what was the core or the source of the burnout? Was it the fact that was it the financial burden that was hitting you? What was it?
That was a piece of it. I just did another degree recently to dig into burnout a little bit further. And one of the key pieces of information that I drew away from this degree is the idea of a web of causation. This is used in epidemiology to describe how people develop things like diabetes. And there's this idea that Americans really want, because Americans love to think in A plus B equals C, right? I learned Chinese medicine. We think in circles, but Americans love A plus B equals C. People want to say, this was the problem, this was the solution, and then I fixed it. But what really happens is I had some senses of unworthiness and some trauma from my childhood that was unresolved. I had the pressure of learning a new language and functioning in a new country, which uses more energy than normal. I had the financial pressures. So there was all of these different elements that had to come together in sort of a perfect storm kind of place. Underneath most of them is a difficulty understanding my own value, which drove a lot of behaviors like overwork and overgiving and overdoing in order to prove myself. Does that make sense?
It does, but a lot of pieces there. But one thing, I love the fact that you have this expertise in Chinese medicine, and so when we're thinking of, does that give you you were talking about thinking about things in a circular fashion versus linear. So it must give you some insight in how to crack this problem. So what are your thoughts there?
One of my favorite things about looking at it through a web of causation and through a more holistic system is that you don't have to solve all the problems at once. I like to think of it almost as, when you have a gold chain and it's got entangled, and the first thing you do is you just press on the top of it a little bit to flatten it out until you can find the one piece that will get rid of that first knot. But it doesn't unwind the whole thing. So I like to look at burnout recovery through that exact same lens. Like I did some therapy. After I got through some of that stuff, I did coaching instead. Once I had enough energy back, I did some functional medicine, nutrition, and some acupuncture. There's a lot of pieces that are necessary to recover from burnout, but you only have to focus on one little knot in the gold chain at a time. And that feeling when you get that first knot and like even inside, like there's an expansion. You're like, oh, I'm getting there. Like something's happening. It's that same feeling. It's that same sensation. So I think avoiding this super linear way of looking at things helps us to avoid the disappointment that inevitably comes by saying, oh, I found a solution, and then realizing that it's not the whole solution.
So what's the first step in that, in finding the first piece to unravel there?
In my work, the thing that we're looking for first, if you're working with someone, so from the position of a coach, my initial job is to facilitate safety. That's the F in Fried, is facilitate safety. We facilitate safety because when you're burnt out, your nervous system is completely activated all the time. So you cannot react appropriately, think appropriately, have appropriate emotions. You are not recovering the way that you're supposed to. Your sleep isn't working the way it's supposed to. You don't have the same kind of power to exercise because you're on fire. So the first step is, how do we bring you back down a notch? How do we facilitate a feeling of internal safety and eliminate maybe some sort of external stressors that are impairing your safety? Maybe you have a bully for a boss at work or a micromanager, or maybe there's Sally from accounting who shoots back every email you send her with every single mistake you've ever made and tells you you're a dummy. Whatever it happens to be, can we eliminate some of those factors and increase your ability to feel safe within your own body so that we can actually do some of this work? Without that, we can't move forward. That's always step one.
So can that be done on the fly, so to speak? I mean, if you're in the
Yeah,
middle of stress, okay, so you
yeah,
can.
absolutely. You can't always, when you are in a highly anxious state or a very angry state, there's a lot of information out there that's like, just breathe and sort of make it go away. No, go do 10 jumping jacks, please. Like, get it, use the hormones in your body that are pushing you to be active. I have a mini trampoline. Right now, I'm in a cloffice. My guest room in my townhouse, my guest closet is 6 by 6, 6 feet by 6 feet. So it's huge. And I don't need a guest that needs a closet that long ever. And so I turned it into my office. But that means my office is pretty small. So if I need to get up and move during the day, I'm standing currently. But if I need to get up and move, I have a mini trampoline out there. So I get a disrupting email. I go outside into my guest room and I bounce 30 seconds. So we have to first, to know what we need in a moment, we first have to know what the moment represents. Is this an anxiety moment? Is this a stress moment? Is this a disappointment? If it's a heavy disappointment or some grief, grief is related to the lungs in Chinese medicine. Maybe we're thinking about a breathing exercise in that kind of situation. But there's not one tool that's ideal for every situation. We have to be responsible about the tools that we choose in particular moments.
So powerful. I mean, and you were mentioning using a trampoline too. I mean, that's kind of. I just read an article not too long ago about the health benefits of getting back on the trampoline. When I was little and rose with my parents, they had a trampoline, and I thought it was so cool in the 70s.
That in the 70s, that was super cool.
Yeah, for sure. But I'm glad to hear that there's a comeback. You can jump on that. The problem is that I had a trampoline, for a big one for my kids. Throughout they went through like 5 of them because they just jumped them into submission.
Mm.
Until it starts coming apart, and they keep jumping, and then it breaks it, right?
Yeah.
You know what, Sam? It's because you were stressing them out too much.
Yeah, this is probably me for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
it's
don't
all
think
your
so.
fault. Now, hey, can I interject here?
Sure.
I just love what you're saying. I mean, absolutely love what you're saying. I worked with HR, human resources, talent management strategy for, I'm going to say 10 plus years. I was definitely, even though I was moving up the chain and, a corporate director and sitting at the executive table, I was being bullied as an executive HR person because everybody hates our HR. I'm sorry. Most people, a few people liked me. I mean, they thought I was kind of cool because I'm kind of funny sometimes, but But I was a people pleaser, and it was really hard because, I just wanted to be loved and I wanted people to like me. And I didn't, it was interesting because I chose HR because it was a people, business thing. And then yesterday I was watching a podcast or listening to a podcast, and they say oftentimes you're influenced what career to pick because of your parents. Your parents kind of encourage you. You should get into government job. You should be an accountant. You should be, like me, be an accountant like me. What are you doing? You're getting into psychology? That's so stupid. What the heck are you going to do with a psychology degree? And I laugh because I have a minor in psychology and an undergrad in communications and a master's in business organizational effectiveness. And I just laugh at my dad and I say, hey, Dad, I'm sorry. I am not an accountant. I am not working for the federal government. Right. However, so I didn't really follow what my dad said because of the family influence, but I did hit massive burnout, particularly because the culture of the company and the bureaucracy and politics was eating me alive. Lack of compassion, no compassion, dignity, and respect. I was laid off twice, and quite candidly, fine, I'll take the 5 to 6 months severance. Keep screwing up. You don't know HR, whatever,
What's
Last
interesting,
thing I'm gonna say,
yeah.
Go ahead.
What's interesting about what you just said is something that comes up a lot is when you look at some of the burnout research, they say companies are 80% at fault for burnout. But when I talk to people one-on-one over the past 7 years, what I found is it's closer to 50-50. The problem of being in a company that's not aligned with your values is a huge one. But that is an issue in that exists in the space that is the relationship between you and the company. Because there are some people that thrive in those low compassionate environments because of the way they were raised or because of whatever background things come into play, right? Yeah, right. So there's this what I want people to consider is sometimes you don't mesh well with the company for whatever reason, and that doesn't make you bad or the company bad. Sometimes the company is bad. I mean, sometimes there's a bully, like you said. Sometimes that's just true. And what's happening in this interim space is what we need to figure out. What's in the relationship? We keep putting these two sides, especially organizational psychologists are like, we have to fix the workplaces. And people are like, yay. But if you put a bunch of traumatized people into a well-functioning workplace, there's still going to be traumatized people who people please and have perfectionism and have feelings of unworthiness and don't have good boundaries and.
Yep.
Right. So we have to work on how these things interact instead of putting them in two separate buckets. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And here's what I want to say about this is that I think it does take self-awareness to realize that you have accountability for the company that you place yourself in. Bingo. You have, like you said before, you have accountability for the degrees that you went after, the master's degrees. You have accountability for living in the town that you decided, driving the hour commute. You have accountability for the choices that you made. So I love what you're saying. I just want to mention one thing, because I know that Sam and Sumit and Howard would love to say a few things too. But I did recently join a Facebook group, and I know it's not here to promote Facebook groups, but this Facebook group is called Freedom from Corporate. Okay. Freedom from Corporate. And what's fascinating is I'm like one of the very few former HR, like corporate. I mean, I do HR with ComTeam and talent management with ComTeam, but more as a consultant, right? But this Freedom from Corporate group, I mean, there's so much anger, and people they don't like HR. Okay, I get that. Just so burnt out with their corporate environment. And one, they're either planning to leave corporate and silently quitting, as they say, or two, they've left corporate and they're like, okay, now what do I do? How do I become an entrepreneur? I can't do corporate anymore. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on people like that. One, planning to leave corporate. Two, so burnt out that once they leave corporate, they're just like, okay, now what do I do with my life? What's your thoughts about that, Cait? And then I'll let the rest of my team talk.
I think the most important thing that was said there that ties into what we were talking about today is they're all so angry. And earlier we said, what do we need to do to start somebody's burnout recovery? I said, facilitate safety. The R is reviewing emotions. Right. The reason I work with resentment in the beginning of people's burnout recovery journeys is because it's the lowest hanging fruit. People are mad. People are angry. People are resentful. So instead of trying to circumspect that experience of theirs, let's get right into it. Let's actually look at it, because we cannot plan a future for you that doesn't include those same elements unless we know what those elements are. And so if we take the time to really sit down and say, well, what are you most resentful about? What's really hitting you now? And go through, there's a series of questions called the question sieve that's in the resentment journal that I created, right? The first question is, does the thing you're resentful about even need to be done? Is the thing you're mad about, does it even need to exist at all? If it doesn't, drop it. Let's take that. Let's prune that right out of your life. There's a good 10 to 20% of things you're mad about in your life right now that you could stop doing immediately and no one would notice. So that's where we go, step number one. And then we go through the question sieve and we get down to this place where the reason that you're resentful is because of a boundary violation. But the first person who violates those boundaries is you. How many times were you overtired and said yes anyway?
Yeah. I'm a yes person, man.
Yeah.
I took on 12 projects,
Exactly.
burnt out, and sadly, I missed a lot of my children's youth
Right.
because I was the workaholic and their father had more time with the kids, and I was very resentful. So I hear you.
Exactly.
I said yes. Give me a million system projects.
Well, here's the thing. I disagree that it's your fault.
Huh.
To me, the question is, what were the behavior patterns that you created in childhood, and how were they successful that drove you to act this way within the workplace? And how can we not demonize those factors because you wouldn't have repeated them for 40 years if they didn't work?
Yeah.
So how can we not demonize those factors, but understand what they were trying to do for you and use them still when they're applicable, but not use them in every single situation because that's your default? So I'm not anti-perfectionism. I'm not even anti-people pleasing. Sometimes people pleasing is the right choice. Can you imagine if I came on this show and my goal was to like piss all you off? That wouldn't be great, right? Like, that's not the point. I do want to please you guys today, not because I need you to like me, but because I want to provide for your listeners something that's worthwhile.
Well, then you'd bring out my red side and I'd need my red glasses like you have. Hey, I'm curious what Sumit, I think what do you think about this from an India point of view? Hi Sumit, what do you think?
I was thinking of it in the light of what you said, Shar, about freedom when you started talking, and it was our Independence Day yesterday, and
Yeah.
I mean there were countless definitions of freedom or independence going around, and I was thinking of it in terms of how I would define it very simply, because my 5-year-old daughter asked me, what does freedom mean, or what is independence? And my answer to her was the ability to just be yourself, where you don't have to pretend, where you can just be you. And I think I'd say that's one of the biggest issues at workplaces. It's not the volume of work, it's not other pressures, it's not inability to meet deadlines. It's the fact that we can't be ourselves. We have to wear different kinds of masks depending on who we're dealing with. And if, like Cait said, safety is step number one. So if we can provide people with that psychological safety with, as Patrick Lencioni calls it, the absence of trust. We fix that. I think we're halfway or maybe even 80% of the way there.
Yeah. Inclusion safety is really critical. I agree.
I think we all deal with, feeling put upon or imposed or not unhappy and have emotions of resentment. But I guess what you're saying is, what did you do with that? What do you do with those feelings? Right. And I think more often than not, we're afraid to speak up, or maybe we're, brought up not to push back or to be that people pleasing person, especially in the HR function.
And resentment is a dangerous emotion. If you
Mhm.
grew up with almost any sort of religious background, resentment is a no-no. So you're not allowed to feel it.
Mhm.
So you have it, but you don't even know you have it because you're not paying attention to it because it's a no-no. And it builds up and it takes up a lot of energy in your body. I just think about the one person who, as soon as their email hits your inbox, your eyes roll. Like you don't even, there's absolutely zero time in between the moment that you see their name, you don't think, nothing happens. Your automatic reaction is like, oh my God, Susan from accounting. Right? This is resentment. But we can't fix that relationship if we can't move through the resentment, which means we cannot extend inclusion safety to Susan from accounting if we don't work through this resentment. So when we are in a place where we are holding on to that resentment, we are making things unsafe for ourselves and for others at the same time.
So I've
So,
got a question here.
oh, go
Yeah.
ahead, Sam.
Sorry.
ahead.
How do we encourage people to voice their resentment? Because I would link this to the quiet quitting or the
Yeah.
silent quitting that Shar mentioned. So
Yes.
how do we actually get people to voice their feelings and maybe prevent resentment from building up in the first place? Or if it's already there, you express it before it becomes, it kind of explodes like a volcano.
Yeah, I don't actually recommend expressing it.
Okay.
That's not
Interesting.
the recommendation. The recommendation is to look at it privately in your own time,
Mhm.
in a way and in a space where you can be objective. Become the observer, pay attention to the situation, figure out what's going on. This is why I have a format for it. This is why the question sieve exists, right? Do I need to drop this? Does it need to be delegated? If so, then to who or what? Because sometimes now we can delegate to software, right? Does it need to be dropped? Does it need to be delegated? Do I need an upgraded tool? One of the things that I realized was really getting my goat while I was burnt out was that I make eggs every morning. I eat eggs and some sort of extras every day for breakfast. My eggs were sticking to my pan and every day I was mad about it. Get a new pan, sister. Right? Like sometimes it's as simple as upgrading the tool that you're using
That's
to
right.
whatever you can afford. Right? There might be some financial constraints, but if the thing needs to be done, you are the person that needs to do it, and you have the best tool available already. Then we have to start looking into the boundaries. Are you doing more than you're being asked for? Have you volunteered for something you don't want to do? Is there a conversation that you need to have internally that says, I won't say yes next time? Or is there a conversation you need to have externally that says, I'm not going to do this next time?
I love your egg pan idea. And I need to get a new egg pan.
Right?
But this reminds me, I think back, a decade ago or 2 days, whenever back, all the leaders went to like a leadership conference, as we did, hundreds of us, and, some OD person, taught us about, crucial conversations. Actually, I'm certified in crucial conversations, blah, blah, blah. Crucial confrontations, I guess, is the other book. But, it was interesting because I knew all the chief nursing officers and the chief directors. Obviously, you can tell I come from healthcare. Had a huge resentment against the chief nursing officer of that hospital. And I don't know that what I was doing wrong, because I felt like I needed to be the voice of reason with the chief nursing officer to be able to articulate on behalf of the leadership team that there was some way underlining resentment, and there was some way underlining burnout. And I don't know what I was saying that really pissed her off. Sorry for the profanity, Sam, but something really pissed her off. And then so she called me to her office. I'll just call her Jill. Miss, Chief Nursing Officer Jill had me come into her office. She had her little packet, her little paper, and she says, "You know what, Shar, I think we need to improve our working relationship because I feel like you and I are not communicating well. I feel there's," and I think she articulated that she felt a lot of resentment coming from me, when really I was like, no, I'm trying to express the resentment coming from your team, and I'm trying to help you and break down the barriers with your team because it's impacting patient care and ultimately patient outcomes. I found it fascinating that she was so defensive as I was trying to articulate that problem, but I was the people strategist and the HR consultant, business partner, and that was supposed to be my job, I thought, to give her that feedback. So what you just said is you have some kind of assessment to decide if we should sit down with that person and make that crucial conversation about the behavior. I mean, can you expand, like in that scenario, what should I have done differently? Because I ended up feeling she resented me more. I must have pissed her off even more.
I mean, it's hard to know what all the factors were, and I don't want to put any thoughts or feelings into Jill, Chief Nursing Officer Jill's brain, because I don't know her, and I'm sure that this is a summarized version of the story.
Sure.
But if someone is what is the right word? If someone is experiencing a lot of resentment toward them, chances are they also have a lot of resentment going outward. Because one of the things that they're likely modeling is an overgiving, overdoing behavior that they then require out of everyone else. Well, I put all the laundry away at the end of the day. Like, why don't you do it? When you do the laundry, why don't you put all the laundry away? I do all the charts at the end of the day, so why don't you do all the charts at the end of the day? So she was likely, this is a possibility, of course, like I said, I don't know the scenario. She was likely modeling a behavior that she then was disappointed in because not everybody was doing it as good as she was doing it. And then the people were mad because her expectations were so high. And she wanted them to be doing things that she was modeling and hinting at, but maybe not making explicit. So there's a lot of miscommunication there. But if she's feeling resentful that she's doing all the things that no one else is doing, and then you come in and you're like, well, people dislike you. Like, how is she supposed to react? She's like, I'm doing everything. What do you want from me? Right? This is an issue that comes down to, if we go through the questions, if we figure out what we're looking at and we realize that she's overgiving, overdoing, and overperforming, then we can work with her one-on-one to say, where are these things coming from? Which of these things is necessary? Which of these things can you let go of? And how can we then change what you're modeling so that your people don't feel so burdened?
Yeah.
This is the leader that emails everybody at midnight and says, but you don't need to answer me until 8 a.m.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is the same thing. Like, why are they mad at me? Like, I just, right? Does that make sense?
Well, you're exactly right. And, I'm probably a little bit more blunt today. I mean, I'm probably
we're talking
more raw.
about resentment. That's fine.
Yeah. And I'm a little more raw than I used to be. I was so politically correct. I was so PC. I was shocked that she was resentful at me because I felt like I was so.
You felt like the same thing that she was doing. I'm doing all the right things and you're still. So now the resentment is just spreading. This is why we work with it, because we don't, it's contagious.
Why do you hate me? Because I'm just the messenger and I'm just trying to help you. And now you hate me. That's why I always say HR is never really liked it at many levels.
Right. So, but now you're resentful at her resentment and she's resentful at their resentment. And now we're all resentful and we're not actually talking about the problem.
Yeah. Well, that was a few decades ago, but look,
Yeah.
I still think about it.
Right?
So like you said earlier, I should just let it go.
It's time.
Thank
I
you.
think we could do a clearing ceremony at the end.
Okay, where's the
That sounds
sage?
good. It's weird how resentment, I mean, just things just hang on,
Yes.
just they can be little things and just
Yeah.
they just go on forever. I mean, I remember just like some silly things I did as a kid. I mean, I remember when I was really little, there was this vending machine near our place, and I could actually stick my hand up there and steal a candy bar out of it, and I felt so bad about it. I still feel bad about it. It's crazy.
Okay, you're freaking me out because Sam, you would never do something like that. You're
That's why
so
it bothers
honest.
me. But anyway, I mean, there's things that come up all the time in the workplace, and as a leader, when we see our people, when there's things that are going on, we see one of our people that are just burnout, and and we're trying to troubleshoot it. We're saying, well, is it that, am I giving them too much work, or is it because they're having these bad interactions with clients? I mean, you're trying to troubleshoot. What can I do? What can I do? What can I do? What can we do? What do you think, Cait?
The first thing is what Summit already said. We start with psychological safety, because if we're back to this conversation about what's happening in the relationship between the workplace factors and the personal factors, what's happening in there that's encouraging someone to overdo those personal factors. If someone is naturally a perfectionist, they're probably going to have issues with overwork, no matter how much work you give them. Right. So workload is, I know that you've already done sort of an intro to burnout podcast, so I won't go into huge detail about some of those things, but workload is one of the top 6 factors that creates burnout in the workplace. But if you have workload as one of the top 6 factors, and the personal factors are ones that I created, the personal factors of perfectionism and people pleasing and low self-worth are in play, well, then tell me that no matter what you do, the workload is probably going to be an issue. Especially if you have a leader that is modeling overgiving, overdoing, showing up early, staying late, emails on the weekends, never taking vacation, having her laptop open in the car while she's waiting in line to pick up her kids, et cetera, right? So we need to create more psychological safety so that people feel safer. That might not change all of their behaviors. B, as leaders, our job is to model what we want to see. So if you don't want your people picking up extra work all the time and working after hours, then you can't pick up extra work all the time and work extra hours. Unless there is a particular, 2 people are on vacation and one person is on parental leave. And now we are in this crisis situation with the information that this crisis situation has an end date, and we're not going to let you guys 4 of you do the job of 7 of you for the long term. If there's an end date, people can manage it, right? But it can't go on like that forever. So psychological safety, number 1. Number 2, modeling what we want to see. But we can't necessarily influence all of the personal factors, and managers, there's more and more research now showing that managers are moving from a place of expertise in their job to expertise in coaching, because that's what people really sort of need more now. Managers do better as coaches than as like being the best IT guy on the block, moving up to a management position. So if we need these managers as coaches, that still doesn't mean that they're therapists or healthcare providers. But should we have someone that they could talk to? A lot of times when I work with a company and do some internal consulting, and this is the beginning of burnout, this is how we deal with resentment, this is what boundaries should look like. We do these series, like a speaker series. Then I'm the person they call and they say, hey, somebody's facing this. What can we do to keep them? And then I work with that person one-on-one. Should that exist in companies? Yeah, I think in most of them it should, because you are not equipped as a leader to manage this situation, and you shouldn't be. Then we're burning you out because we're giving you jobs that you're just not qualified to do.
I'll say real fast that typically employees don't trust HR programs like that. Traditionally, employees don't trust
This is not an HR program.
Okay.
I'm an outside person.
Yes, and actually that's what I am too. That's what I say is I'm an outside HR person, a talent
I'm not
management
HR.
person, and I am not associated with your business either. It's totally confidential. Your company doesn't even need to know about me, right? Is that what you're saying?
It can be that way, but I do find that me being separate from the company and me having a very strict confidentiality clause is typically enough. And by the time people need me, if they don't work with me, they're going to lose their jobs because
Yeah.
they can't stay. Either they're going to quit, so we're talking about like kind of serious high risk situations here that people are willing to sort of jump into and fix.
Spot on.
You know, one thing you mentioned is you said you were talking about barriers or boundaries. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You were talking about boundaries in just a moment ago. And when we think about boundaries for each one, they're different for different people, right?
Yeah.
And you know those things. So as when you're thinking about a leader respecting people's boundaries and so forth, I mean, it's kind of a custom approach, right? I mean, how do we go about
It's a
doing this?
custom approach every single day.
Yeah.
Because if I woke up this morning, if I went to bed too late last night, got interrupted in the middle of the night because my kid was, I don't even have kids, but let's say my kid was sick in the middle of the night. And then I had to get up 2 hours later and I went and did some exercise that I wasn't really recovered enough to do. And then I was driving to work, and on the way to work, I found out that my mom fell and broke her hip. And then what are my boundaries going to be like that day? What are my needs going to be like that day? Completely different than yesterday, where I had a good night's sleep. I had a great breakfast. Everybody's healthy and okay. I'm not worried about anything external. So when we do boundary work in companies, we talk a lot about when you look at boundary in research, there's this continuum that they talk about boundaries on, from integration to segmentation. Completely segmented is really dangerous because that means you're trying to keep every single part of your life separate from everything else. And that's A, not possible, and B, unhealthy. Totally integrated is like very codependent and unable to stand on your own 2 feet. So we need to find where we can create a little bit more segmentation to keep you safe and healthy, and a little bit more integration, which comes in the form of help and support, right? Inviting people in as much a boundary as keeping people out or keeping tasks out. So where do we need to invite in support, open that gate, and get you the things that you need that you don't have access to right now? So this is about understanding that boundaries are constantly moving, that there's always going to be something that adjusts a little bit, and ensuring that we are modeling working to our current capacity, which means adjusting sometimes. And I know we can't have everybody working at 60% all the time, but if we're honest, everybody already is.
Right. Well, I mean, when we're talking, so there's one thing is understanding having
Yes.
self-awareness about how
Yeah.
you are doing that day, but then there's other people that have to be empathetic. They have to, what can people do to understand a person's different changes throughout their day and the stress that they're experiencing? I mean, are there certain tools or that you
The tool
provide
is
people?
curiosity.
So
If you don't know your people, and if your people don't know you enough and don't trust you enough to talk to you,
Mhm.
then you don't know what's going on in their lives, and it's really hard to make adjustments. A lot of people like to say, well, I don't talk about things like that at work because it's not appropriate. But you also want people to grant you grace, and you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
We as humans are not designed to grant each other grace without backstory. So you don't need to give all the details of everything that's going on in every part of your life. But if there's no backstory involved, you are unlikely to get the grace you need to get the time and space that you might need in order to manage something. But in order for that to happen, we go back to psychological safety, right? We're back down to the same thing again. People need to know you and trust you and feel like you're curious about their lives. Otherwise, they're not going to tell you, and you're just guessing.
Yeah, so you have to have those relationships, right?
Yeah.
You need to get to know your people, and need to take an interest
Yes.
in different things, for sure. Yeah, it's so important, when we're talking about these issues. I mean, it's so funny. It's just 5 years ago, or talking about burnout and work. I mean, it wasn't even a thing, right? It was,
Yeah.
but it's funny how past events or current events have put things in perspective. I mean, that things are different. So what do you see as the most important theme that is going on right now that's emerging in your work that leaders should know?
The most important theme that's coming up now is this idea that people want to be treated like adults. A lot of our corporate structures are very paternal in nature. And I don't mean paternal as in like the patriarchy, although that is related. I mean paternal from like an ethics perspective, where we give people small bits of information and no access to things, and we tell them what we want them to do from the top down and expect them to just listen and respond. And we are changing our responses to what they need in order to fit a narrative. So when people are saying things like, I'm really burnt out, I need some help, they're giving a talk or pulling in a speaker to talk about resilience instead of to talk about burnout directly. And what I'm finding is people that when I come in and I'm talking about burnout directly and resentment directly, and companies are hiring me to talk about resentment directly, the feedback is, thank God we're finally talking about the stuff that's really happening, instead of pulling in another happiness expert, which I love a happiness expert. I'm not anti that. But if we're burnt out, that happiness expert is not going to touch what we're doing. We need to deal with this first. So people tend to be really positively surprised when their companies are willing to be honest about the truth of what they're all talking about anyway.
Yeah. Well,
So
this
that's
has
a
been
big shift.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been a great conversation. I'm going to take a quick pause here and just let our audience members know that to send in some questions. We do have a question that I'll get to in just a moment. But before we jump there, I just want to make sure that everybody understands who our speaker is for next week. We're going to have Patrick Sutton join us. And I love Patrick Sutton. I mean, just I follow him on LinkedIn and so forth. I mean, he's a really powerful person to kind of track and see how his career is going. But we're going to talk about the Earth's best employee experience and how to do that in the factor of the team. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Also, I want to point out our sponsor, TMA. We were just talking about getting to know your people and understanding, where they're coming from every day and their talents and their mindset. The TMA tool is something that can help you understand your people better, have those effective conversations, and it's just really a great way to learn more about each other and understand their communication style, the type of learning style that they have. So it's just a wonderful tool that they're always evolving, and it's very powerful. So if anybody would like to learn more about the TMA method, please reach out to me. I'm happy to take you through a demo and show you what those assessments look like. Great. So back to you, Cait, I'd like to bring up this story. Well, I mean, actually a question that we have from Anna. And so her question is just, she says that she's very skeptical about her manager and other people knowing too much about her personal life. She goes on to saying, I've been in leadership positions in the past. A manager who showed interest in my personal life actually hurt her, and it didn't help at all. What do you think about that?
I think you're right to be skeptical. And I don't think everyone deserves your story. So this is a Brené Brown thing, right? Not everyone deserves your story. And we do have to learn we do have to play with what we're willing to let go and how much we need to reveal in order to get the grace that we're asking for. If you're not asking for grace or accommodations for anything, then you don't have to say anything. But if you need grace or accommodations for something, you will need to share it. Knowing that somebody could abuse that is going back to psychological safety and trust. If somebody did abuse that, then that's information for you that this is not a good company for you and it's time to get out because you are not safe. But you can't find that out unless you're willing to take the risk. So I believe that it's risky. I think it's riskier for some people than others. Let's be frank that I am coming from a position of a privileged white woman, right? So I understand that is riskier for some people than others. And still, we're back to this layer of trust and psychological safety. Should someone use your story against you, you really should not be working in that space. And again, this is a privileged position because in the US, there's a decent number of jobs. And if you lose one, you're likely to be able to get another. I just had someone from South Africa speak with me recently and say, listen, there's 60% unemployment. I can't just leave my job. But if then someone disrespects those boundaries, your job is to not give them more information and take what you need almost brutally if you have to, because you know they've told you what the rules of engagement are. They've shown you what they're going to do. But there is an inherent risk in sharing that story. That is the risk you need to take to get the grace that you need to get. We don't get the things we need without taking any risk, unfortunately. But I do think the skepticism is normal.
What about confronting the person that sort of violated that personal no go?
It won't do anything most likely because that person doesn't understand that they violated anything most of the time.
Mhm.
And unless it's coming from someone above them and they're putting them on some sort of pip for it, like it's unlikely to be.
Go anywhere.
Yeah. Then that I
Yeah.
think that's riskier than sharing your story in the first place.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from there, but I think it's so super important to I mean, some people just are clueless. You know,
Yes.
they are clueless. They don't know. And then they trample on you and they don't understand. And sometimes you just gotta, hey, you know, this is what happened.
Yeah.
This is the way it's made me feel.
Yeah.
You know, if is this what you intended? You know, so
Sometimes that can break things down, right? And that can create a new door for a better relationship. I think my answer would really depend on how was the abuse shown. Like if it was used against you and it was intentional, that conversation is probably not going to be helpful. If it was by accident, that conversation might be helpful, but then you have to trust yourself enough to judge whether you think that interaction was intentional or not.
right. What do you think, Sumit? Is there a thought, you know, when we're thinking about, you know, when a person abuses your trust, you know, and you've, is there any type of remedy for that?
Very complicated and multi-layered question, I'd say, Sam, because it depends on what kind of trust has the person breached. I mean, I don't know if there's a technical term for it, but I mean, if it's something as simple as I trusted a friend to book a movie ticket and they forgot, or they didn't make a lunch booking, easier to forget, and move on. If it's something a little more serious and a little closer to the heart, forgiving somebody and moving on could be tougher. And I'd apply the same logic at the workplace as well, where if a person in my team makes a mistake with relatively lower consequences, I could simply brush it off. If it makes me look stupid in front of the big boss, may not be so forgiving and might be difficult to trust not only that individual, but all of their peers or other people across saying, I'll remember this example more often. My negativity bias will get the best of me and I can't trust people anymore. So I don't know if it answers your question,
Yeah.
but might be more questions than answers in that one.
I'm just wondering, is there something to do? And, you know, Cait, you were mentioning that situation of your colleague in Africa that didn't have options, you know, did not have options. So if we're dealing with somebody that's caustic, somebody that's making us resent the way that we feel, the way that we live, and we don't have options, I mean, what is the best course of action? I mean, is it just trying
To
to
me,
protect ourselves?
Yeah, you do all the things that you can do to work out your side of the equation as much as you possibly can. And then you quiet quit. And I highly recommend it in that scenario because they don't deserve you. And I know that that's not a popular thing to say. I get it, but they don't deserve you.
Yeah.
Protect yourself. Keep yourself as safe as you can within a dangerous environment. And still keep looking, even if the chances are low that you'll be able to get out of there. Look anyway. Keep your eyes peeled. Make sure people know you're looking for an opportunity. Do everything you can to get out. Nobody should be forced to stay in a place where they're being abused.
For sure. Yes.
And
Advice.
that's great advice in my opinion as well, because a lot of people would debate and say, hey, why quiet quit? Why not loud quit and make other people aware or spread the word? It's not my job. My job is protecting my own mental well-being and my own interests. It's not to say things to the world about a particular person. So
I think
think
if
it's
you can get
absolutely-
away with it and you're going to get another job and you have the energy to do it, go for it. But if you don't and you're not going to get another job and you need to feed your family next week,
completely agree. And I
Right?
mean, again, in all likelihood, you're quiet quitting because you really don't have the energy to fight it out anymore.
exactly.
And you don't owe it to anyone to warn them off.
Right.
You just owe it to yourself to save yourself.
Yes.
So Cait, yes, you're right. My face is going all over the place. Because, comp team is always about retention and attracting and retaining good employees. And recently I have been researching, how to deal with a narcissist
Mm-hmm.
and how to work with narcissism behavior. And, and as this is the first time I think in this people strategy forum we've ever told people to quietly quit. So if you're noticed, because I am very expressinated, okay, and this is the first time we've ever said that.
Not surprised.
And however, it's I mean, even on my own personal development, it's like if you're dealing, and I hate to use labels like narcissism or a bully, it's oftentimes, how to manage your emotions and not to react to the emotions and not to yell, scream, instigate, fight, react to the, the negative behavior. So I do find that fascinating. And I am curious what Sam thinks about the quiet quitting topic. What do you think about that,
Well,
Sam?
Well, definitely we were talking about this in the context of not having options.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's
Exactly.
a very important. But of course, I mean, the best thing is if you're in a toxic situation, you got to find a way out.
Exactly.
And before
Which
it destroys you.
which is why I highly advocate everybody, no matter if you're happy in your job, you need to have your LinkedIn profile up to date. You need to have your resume up to date. You need to be looking at all times, no matter how comfortable you are in your job, to be looking at other options. If you truly are working with a toxic work environment, always be prepared, because I was laid off twice and you just don't know. And I thought I was doing a good job because I had excellent performance evals, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes
So
it's not about performance, but for sure.
it's
but
politics.
yeah.
Okay, I'll shut up.
But anyway, I mean, I mean, we are at the top of the hour, so we're running out of time. This has just been, I mean, Cait, I mean, as we were talking before the session, I mean, this is so interesting, such a wonderful work that you do and the people that you help. It's so important. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for
Very,
having me.
very provocative and very inspiring. And I love it because you really spoke the truth. And I do appreciate it, no matter my facial expressions. You rock, girl. And I love your burnout topic. This is awesome.
Thank
Yes,
you.
and I'll definitely, and everyone on the call, I mean, do know that Cait has her own podcast, and Cait, can you tell us about that and how we can learn more?
Fried the Burnout podcast is the best way to find out about all things burnout and all things me, really, because it's easy to find any links that you might need to me in there. Fried has got over 200 episodes now, answers pretty much every question you could think of. And if it haven't answered a question, you're always welcome to hop into Fried's Facebook group and say, Cait, we need an episode on the answer to this question. And I will likely make one for you.
Well, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nice
Right.
meeting you, Cait.
Thank you, Cait. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone, and see you next week on the People Strategy Forum.
Thank you,
Right.
Kate. Bye.